Welcome to the Nerd Party.
I did not hit her. I did not. It's bullshit. I did not hit her. I did not. Oh, hi, Mark. And welcome to the A24 Project here on the Nerd Party, the only podcast that takes you to the back catalogue of A24 films, 2 films every fortnight, as well as bringing you the behind-the-scenes look through interviews with the talent involved. On this week's episode, we won't be keeping our comments in our pockets as we review The Disaster Artist and The Ballad of Lefty Brown. I'm your co-host Dallas King, and with me as always is Lee Hutchison. How are you?
Hi there, I suppose I'm the Mark to your Tommy in this one.
Oh, I guess so. Yeah. No, you're definitely the Mark to my Tommy, and the Greg to my Tommy, and the Mark to my Johnny, of course.
That's the one.
That's the one. Yeah. It gets confusing with all these names, but at least you're not Denny, the slightly creepy, possibly mentally ill. Is he a child? Is he an adult? We don't know, and I expect the people making the room didn't know either. But we'll get on to that. So, before we dig into our plastic spoons and get ready to throw them across the room, it's time, of course, to start off with some A24-hour news. And the big news over the past week is the fact that A24 did reasonably well at the Independent Spirit Awards, as they were announced this week, with a total of 18 nominations across the board, more than any other film studio / distribution company. Those nominations include 5 for The Lighthouse, with Best Director, Cinematography, Editing, Actor and Supporting Actor. Uncut Gems got 5 for Best Feature, Director, Screenplay, Editing and Actor. The Farewell got 3, with Feature, Supporting Actress and Someone to Watch, in terms of the director Lulu Wang. And The Last Black Man, San Francisco got 3, Best First Feature, Supporting Actor and Someone to Watch, and then single nominations for Midsummer for cinematography, and then Waves for supporting actress as well. So Lee, what did you make of these nominations? Happy with the ones that got nominated, or were there any glaring omissions for you?
I think Waves deserved a few more awards, but I think it's going to definitely be the season of sort of A24 going in. I think you look at last year and sort of First Reformed was the only one to really make any sort of dent on a kind of, national kind of level in terms of, say, your Academy Awards and so on. So it feels like A24 is going all out to sort of woo the voters and kind of get a good bit of momentum going into the season. I think with something like Waves in particular, I think it stands a really good chance. If I was a betting man, I think Waves is the most potentially accessible film for award voters. I think The Lighthouse is just the slightly better film, but there's not much in it. But I can't see that one being as accessible enough to potentially get all the award nominations that it deserves.
Yeah, no, I think on paper, I think Waves is given by the ones that have managed to creep through, obviously Moonlight being the main winner, but they have had some success with sort of The Disaster Artist, which we're going to talk about, got nominated for Best Adapted Screenplay. They've Ex Machina won Best Visual Effects, Amy won Best Documentary. So, I mean, there's history there at the Oscars of A24 doing well, but they've always seemed to have sort of gone in with one particular film. This year they are going all out with sort of 4 to 5 titles, and it's going to be interesting. I think Farewell could maybe creep into sort of that sort of Best Picture if it gets sort of around 9 or 10. I think, like, say, Lighthouse is maybe a bit too on the out there side to break through. Potentially sort of Defoe in supporting actor, if they indeed go down that route. One could argue that technically they're both leads, but of course that's never stopped companies sort of basically pushing people into different categories just in order to get as many nominations as possible. I mean, sort of looking through the nominations of these ones, there's a few that maybe sort of stand out as interesting. The fact that, I thought Florence Pugh might have got a nomination for Best Actress. That was the kind of role which seems sort of destined for that sort of acclaim. It's great to see Robert Pattinson getting a nomination for Best Actor, but I found it interesting that even though Marriage Story, which is a film which we'll talk about in an upcoming filibuster, one of the best films of the year, it's getting the Robert Altman Award, which I wonder is maybe the reason why you don't see Adam Driver and Scarlett Johansson in the acting categories, because I think if they were in there, no one else would probably have a chance. So I think it's almost like they were taken out to sort of level the playing field a bit and give everyone else the opportunity to win something, because I think they're going to be huge Oscar frontrunners in those categories. But I think it's a great sign for A24 and sort of shows that they're doing the right thing, I think. And
my outside bet is Florence Pugh for Best Actress for Midsummer and Florence Pugh for Best Supporting Actress for Little Women. That's my outsider's bet. You know, if you've got some money left over at Christmas, I would encourage people to try and put a tenner on that one.
What are you saying, that she's not going to get nominated for Fighting with My Family?
Well, that's potentially true and stuff, but yeah, that is my bet. I think I've been lucky enough to see Little Women a few weeks early, and Florence Pugh...
Here we go, here we go. It begins.
Florence Pugh steals the show in that film, and all I would say for Midsummer fans is there's a scene that will have extra resonance with the fans of that film, where at one point she's wearing a crown of flowers and starts whooping and cheering, I'm going to Europe, I'm going to Europe. So I think when you're in a cinema audience, the people that have seen the film or maybe even the meme will get an extra kick from that moment.
Well, as much as I would love to see Florence Pugh Oscar nominated for Midsummer, I have been burned alive in a bear before when it comes to that particular category and the elevated horror genre. I'm doing my inverted commas in the air again, which of course no one can see, because of course Toni Collette I thought was the best performance of that year, yet not even a nomination at the Oscars. So maybe this is the chance for the Academy to right that grievous wrong and give Florence Pugh the nomination, because I think it's thoroughly deserved, certainly from what I've seen so far in terms of the films and performances which are being talked about. So, you know, we'll see if your bet comes true. But yeah, no, a double nominee, that's happened before as well. So yeah, I guess we'll have to see what happens come mid-February. So, but fingers crossed that A24 do well throughout the rest of the season. But I think they will have a very good showing and a lot of representation at the Academy Awards and the BAFTAs that come this time round. But another piece of news this week is that A24 have sort of hopped on the bandwagon of exclusivity when it comes to sort of TV channels and streaming rights and stuff like that, and that Showtime have picked up an exclusive rights deal with A24 for their content up until the year of 2022. Now, I'm not too familiar with Showtime, but what I gather is it's a similar channel to like HBO, and that it's a premium cable channel in America, and you'll be able to catch all of their films. They've got the back catalogue, such as Moonlight, Lady Bird and stuff like that, but it does mean that any films going forward will only be available on TV. How that affects streaming, I'm not sure, because, you know, we do see a lot of A24 films sort of pop up on Netflix and the like, so it's going to be interesting to see how that affects it. Is streaming television? We don't know. Does it count as TV? I'm not really sure. So what do you think this means for A24 and their future product going onto the television? And I assume this is just an American-based deal as well.
Yeah, I'm not too concerned about it. When I sort of saw the headline first off, I was like, oh, right, that's quite interesting. But really, it's only sort of a select band of titles. And in terms of that, it's just less movies perhaps on something like Netflix, for example. You know, we'll still have the options to watch it here elsewhere in the UK, but in terms of that, they get a handful of their titles. I suppose it's kind of similar to that deal they had in America where libraries had pretty much every single A24 film, and I think that service is kind of coming to an end or in some form or another. So it's probably just a bit of extra money in the A24 kitty, not that they need it, but I don't think it's anything particularly to worry about. If you want to watch Moonlight, it's not really going to cost you much. It seems to be 99 cents to rent most weeks on iTunes USA. You can probably pick up the Blu-ray for £6, and if you've got Showtime on cable, you can probably watch on their demand service. So it's not the be-all and end-all of not seeing any of these films again.
No, I mean, yeah, there'll always be ways to see it. It just seems that America in particular seems to be becoming even more and more divided into the amount of streaming services and channels that you need to subscribe to in order to get all your content, with it being so segregated. So I guess you've got to sort of pick and choose your battles, but hey, that's where physical media always wins. You can always have the copy on your shelf that you can go to at any time, until, of course, you know, that format becomes obsolete and you need to buy an entirely new thing like Ultra HD, Blu-ray, 4K, whatever, blah, 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 blah. So yeah, but for the foreseeable future, Blu-rays or iTunes. So there we go. If you're not physical media inclined. And of course, the final bit of news is this is a little bit of breaking news, which I discovered. It's quite a horrifying piece of news. It was the fact that someone on Twitter was talking about how they got the Lighthouse mermaid soap in their gift basket from A24 this year, which led me to question, A24 are giving out gift baskets, and if so, A24, why have we not received them? You know, we've been going for a year now. We promote your films on a weekly basis now, thanks to all your great interviews, Lee. You know, I think, you know, it's coming up for Christmas and Thanksgiving, you know. I think, you know, we deserve a gift basket, don't you? I mean, we've been going on about those bloody candles for over a year now. So, I mean, come on, A24, show us some love.
I will happily go back and talk about Revenge of the Green Dragons being an incredible film if I get a free basket or some, you know, I'm happy to be a corporate shill for free shit and stuff. Till then, I will say which films are good, which are rubbish, but, you know, I'm happy to change my tune and be absolutely shameless and just put this out as propaganda for A24. So, you know, announce the gift basket.
I know, I will keep my integrity because, as A24 can look through the records, I am quite a regular subscriber to their shop now that they do UK shipping. So I haven't gone in on the hoodie or latest jumper that they've put up online, but I may have mentioned it to my wife as a potential Christmas present. And then I think the look on her face when she saw how much it was, including shipping, and went, really? It's just a grey hoodie with an A24 on it? And I went, yeah, but... And it's like, yeah, that's how much of a stan I am. I will happily accept that as my only Christmas present if, you know, it's still available. Because let's face it, it probably isn't. It probably sold out within 24 hours, as most things do. Never did get that bear in a cage either. Oh, terrible. Did you ever get a bear in a cage?
No, the only thing I've ever bought from the shop was the A24 tour t-shirt, so I got that. So that's my only purchase so far from the shop. I just can't justify the costs, to be honest.
Well, but you know, speaking of purchases from the shop, we may be making one very, very soon. Actually, tomorrow, in fact, because of course this episode is going out on Monday the 2nd of December, and today, if you're listening bright and early in the UK or around about lunchtime in the US, you still have a few hours to head over to iTunes and leave us a written review for the A24 project, and we will be picking one winner out of the bundle to receive the A24 film mug of your choice. So you could pick brand new hit Waves or The Lighthouse, or you could say, if you perhaps wanted a Revenge of the Green Dragons one, or a glimpse into the mind of Charlie Swan III. No judgment here. You know, we will let you pick whatever mug you want, and we will get it to you. Possibly not in time for Christmas, depending on shipping, of course. We're not going to make that guarantee, but we will pick one winner to get that. So, Lee, you know, I did offer you, I bought a Lighthouse mug recently. I did offer you the chance. Did you just couldn't make a decision on which one you wanted, did you?
No, I couldn't quite settle on one. I think if there's something that comes up in their shop, perhaps in a few months' time, I might do the double header. But no, I couldn't kind of think of which one I wanted to get. I've not really been inspired by sort of the mug designs. I keep saying I think it would look really cool if they had like the film logos and fonts and stuff like that. They're just sort of too kind of uniform and stuff for my liking. But I'm sure some lucky winner out there will be happy with their one.
Absolutely. And Lee, you have just given them an idea. You know, they can do the regular mugs, and then they can bring out logo mugs later on, and then they can get all our money all over again. So there you go. We've just given you a free merchandising idea there. So, but of course, you know, we're here to talk not about the shop, not pimping the shop. We're here to talk about films, of course. And the first film on today's episode is The Disaster Artist, directed by James Franco and written by Michael H. Weber and Scott Neustadter, who have previously written screenplays for the likes of 500 Days of Summer. This film is based on the book by Greg Sestero, which documents the origins of his friendship with Tommy Wiseau and their collaboration on making the 2003 cult classic The Room. The film stars the Franco brothers as Tommy and Greg, along with a whole host of Hollywood talent, including Seth Rogen, Ari Grainer, and Zac Efron as Chris R. So, but, you know, before we go in and discuss a film based on the true life story of Greg Sestero, who better to talk about that than Greg Sestero himself? Now, Lee, you were lucky enough to talk to him a couple of months ago. Do you want to sort of tee up a brief sort of excerpt from that chat?
Yeah, so this was one of my most... I literally sat on the other end of this interview with like the biggest smile on my face. Like, I've known Greg Sestero as Mark, and he's such a great personality. I've met him a couple of times at sort of live room events, and I never sort of imagined when I proposed coming on the show that he would agree to come on. So like, he was one of the most positive, charming, lovely people, and I just sat there sort of doing eyes on the other end of a Skype call with him. So this is Greg Sestero talking about sort of the adaptation of The Disaster Artist, his book, into the feature film and the success that came with that. So enjoy. When did you first hear of someone wanting to adapt your book into film? Like, as you mentioned, like, you're writing this book, but you can picture it becoming a film one day. When was that moment that you realised, actually, this is on the road to becoming reality?
Well, there was this really great book to film agent who read it before it came out, and he agreed to represent it, which was the first step, which was very exciting. And then he was asking, like, who do you see doing this, and I was, I of course said David Fincher, because he's my favorite director, and he's like, I don't know, David's kind of dark, and so I saw this as kind of a dark Ed Wood, something along the lines of Foxcatcher, where you have a lot of tension between the two characters. And so we had a few talks. Tommy was there, and Tommy was like, well, why don't you represent my new sitcom? Even though we were meeting about the book. And then the book came out. 3 weeks after it came out, I got a call from James Franco. He had read the book. He had never seen The Room at the time. He had heard of it, I think, and he read the book, and he's like, halfway through, he's like, he knew he wanted to make this movie. He knew he wanted to play Tommy, and he knew that he wanted Dave to play me. And so we had a kind of an interesting conference call with Tommy and James, and Tommy's like, who play me in the movie? And James is like, well, we'll find people, Tommy, don't worry. He didn't know really what to say, and Tommy's like, well, what about Johnny Depp? And James is like, yeah, sure, and kind of laughed it off. And Tommy's like, why you laugh? You don't go down this direction, you don't know. And he's like, we'll find somebody, Tommy. We'll find somebody. And then I recommended, I was like, James, I think you'd be a good fit. And so that kind of got the ball rolling. And Tommy's like, yeah, James, I see a movie. You do some good movie, you do some bad movie, but that's okay. I was like, oh, great. Hopefully this happens. But through the film adaptation process, I learned a lot from James, because it takes so much passion to get a movie made. To get something from the page to the screen, and to convince people to believe in it. And so, James impressed me a lot, because he said he was going to do this. He said it was the story that he was most interested in making, and he did it. And I saw the process of kind of what that takes to pull off. And so it kind of set the stage for me to go out and try to make Best Friends, because I saw, if you really want to get that vision to the screen, if you really want to make movies, there's a certain way you got to approach it. And so watching James kind of navigate this story, from the book and getting it adapted, was really a great experience.
Well, yeah, was there any ever sort of concerns about being turned into film, one that might not be faithful to those that were involved, like such as yourself, and it could be potentially like a parody or a big in-joke? Was there ever sort of that kind of quality control where you're like, we want this to be faithful and respectful of those people that have put this film out?
I could just tell from what James... First of all, James wrote a review in Vice about what he thought about the book and the movie, and just the way he saw the story was so spot on and smart. And he referenced like P.T. Anderson films and all the things you'd want your story to elevate to. So I knew he had the right angle, and I knew having Seth Rogen as a producer, he always puts on a good show, and they got really good writers to adapt the story. So I knew they were going to go for it. I knew it wasn't kind of like a stoner joke comedy. So I was never concerned. I mean, really the concern is that people stop it from getting made or just don't believe in it. That's really where my head was at. It's like, let's just get this thing made, and I think that the source material and everything is unique enough to make it something memorable.
Did you get to meet with Dave Franco before he was sort of cast to talk to him about playing you, and did you have anyone in mind? Like you mentioned, sort of Tommy had a few folk in mind who could maybe play him. Who did you originally envision playing you?
When I was writing the book, I was thinking Javier Bardem as Tommy and Ryan Gosling as Greg. But I think once James brought up the idea of brothers, I thought it was a cool choice that they could make work between them, because the story is in a lot of ways about two guys that were brothers in a different way. And I thought that was a good choice.
And did you get did he reach out to you for any sort of advice, kind of get into the mind of Greg Sestero? What was the sort of dynamic?
Yeah, we had a couple great meetings, and we really connected on the fact that, we both came to LA trying to be actors and having to kind of put in that time of auditioning and doing these weird projects that we really think are going to work. And then, we see them and we're like, oh dear God, this is bad. And just kind of trying to keep the faith. We both come from a similar area up in Northern California. We both like the same sports team, so we had a lot in common, and just it was funny to see Dave being introduced to this world, because I know he hadn't seen The Room, and James kind of brought him in, and so it was funny to see just how, through his eyes, just how weird the whole thing is. So yeah, but we had some really good talks, and he really got what I went through.
Did you get to sort of visit the film during the production, or did you want to sort of keep yourself sort of hands off?
Yeah, I mean, I showed up just to enjoy. I never thought like, they should do it this way or that way. I just was excited to be there, and again, just see it. It was such a fun set to be on, because everybody was working so hard, but also having so much fun. And the cast was incredible. I went the day that they filmed with Sharon Stone and Bryan Cranston, and getting to see these people recreate your story in a way was very therapeutic, and the whole thing was just really enjoyable.
Was it quite surreal to see a film being made of a book you've made, of an experience that you've had? What was that kind of like?
Yeah, it just kind of, again, it made you realize, every experience you have, whatever struggles you have, or good times, or just your journey, there's nothing really goes to waste. And it made me realize all those times I was at Canners, wondering what was going to happen, or all those late night walks. It all was amounting to something. And so it made me value the time you have, and to make the most of each day, and to look at things positively rather than getting down on yourself.
When did you sort of first see the completed film?
I got to see a test screening cut, and I loved it. It was incredible to see it in LA, like a few blocks from where it all took place, in the apartment. And it did change and get improved by the time it was released, but I could definitely see that it was something that audiences were going to be responding to. And it was fascinating to think, like, what are people that have never heard of The Room going to think of this, and how are they going to see Tommy and I? And that's where a big part of the reason why I started writing the new script after I saw the test screening.
And you mentioned there, how will people see you? How have people kind of seen you following this movie, you and Tommy?
I think they've been inspired. I think the movie showed what can happen. If you follow your dream, what good can come from that, and what challenging things can come from that. and I think they relate to the underdog story, and they've really they've really enjoyed it. So it's been cool to have kind of a new audience discover all this.
The film got like rave reviews and reactions from South by Southwest, festivals and circuits. How did it feel for something that you'd been through and, you'd faced challenges, maybe a negative reaction, to then come out of it with almost the complete opposite response? You get all that adulation that The Room never got on its original release.
Yeah, I mean, it was sort of like, Tommy's pipe dream was for The Room to be nominated for Oscars, and my pipe dream was that this book would become something like that. And so you kind of throw it out to the universe. You have these big dreams and these big hopes, and then you get a taste of it, and you realize, hey, if you put your mind to something and you put your heart into something and approach it in the right way, good things can happen. And it was just a great lesson for me going forward that, to approach things with the right mindset. And I think, the fact that the audience loved the movie and loved the book and all that, it's a good starting point to go out there and now do the work that you really want to do.
The film went on to be nominated for Best Adapted Screenplay. How was that for you? Were you one of those people that there was a lot of buzz going in that it would be nominated for that? Were you up first thing in the morning to see the announcements? How did you find out that a book you'd written had got to that stage, to get to the Academy Award nominee kind of stage?
A buddy of mine from Europe sent me a message that woke me up that morning. So that was obviously, incredible and very exciting. I really thought James deserved a Best Actor nomination. So that was a little, kind of a bummer that didn't happen. But it was a great reward that the book got there. And, it's a once in a lifetime kind of thing where, a moment, capturing a period of time in your life that goes that far. So I really was blown away and really made me think, hey, good things can happen. Get out there and keep writing.
Great story, Mark. So yeah, that was just a brief excerpt from Lee's interview, and you can catch the whole thing on a previous episode, and we'll put the link up in the show notes for you. So Lee, when did you first become aware of The Room? Not The Disaster Artist, but the original Room.
That I can't quite remember. It's been a good few years now. I think it's one of those ones, I think, of our generation, guys in their 30s. It's you've kind of been aware of The Room as a thing for probably a bit longer than most people. And I remembered sort of it would be once a year, maybe in kind of Edinburgh. It used to be a thing, and then it kind of peaked a few years ago, really, of like it would be on like every few months. And I think sort of the advent of sort of social media, of like these things becoming events, have really kind of made people find and discover The Room. So I was listening to a podcast recently where they were talking about how cinemas are going to survive. So obviously there's this whole antitrust thing just now in America where they're like, cinemas like Disney or Paramount could buy cinemas and literally just shove their product in it. So you could have an entire cinema dedicated to just showing the Disney movies non-stop all day, which could be some people's idea of heaven, but could kind of crowd out the indie market. So I was listening to that, and they were talking about how the Music Box, which is amazing cinema in Chicago, has become one of these places that does these events where it's like people want to go along. It's like a one night only screening. This guest will be here. People will turn up, and you make it something there where people want to take a picture. It goes on their Instagram, obviously when the film's not screening. And The Room seems like the kind of perfect embodiment of that success. That I've seen it here in Edinburgh a couple of times where I've had my plastic spoons out. I've had it where it's been a screening with just Greg there talking about the Disaster Artist book. I've seen it down in London where like Tommy basically has a residency there every few months at the Prince Charles Cinema, and it's events. They're always sellouts. They're always crammed, and it's people that are going back and back and back. And it just seems to become this thing so much in the past years that it's just so exciting. So I've kind of seen it, 4 or 5 times with And I think apart from once, one of the stars of the film has always been there, and I've got my picture taken a couple of times as well, which is a treat.
Yeah, no, I've sadly have never been able to make it down to the Prince Charles to see Tommy and Greg live in action. It's one that I'd love to be able to do, but sadly I've not been able to make that. I believe you can buy Tommy Wiseau underpants. Is this correct?
I can confirm 100% that there is underpants, yes.
Well, you see, that's just something I need in my life. But I mean, I remember, I think, becoming aware of the film sort of around about maybe 2009. I remember when sort of working at the Belmont in Aberdeen, we started doing a series of sort of cult screenings. This started with selling out Screen 3, which was a smaller screen, which was sort of 65 people, with The Human Centipede, and there was an audience for that. So then this was sort of when Picture House became aware of the room and sort of booked it to tour around a few cinemas. So we got it up in Aberdeen. Screen 3 sold out. Some people were aware of it, some people sort of just took a punt on it, and there wasn't a huge amount of interaction by that point. There was a few people with spoons, and there was people sort of going, oh, okay, so what is this? And it's, like you say, it has built up a reputation over the past few years now, where it has become sort of our generation's sort of Rocky Horror Picture Show, where it's the full interactive screening. People are shouting out things at the screen, they're yelling the lines along. During the sex scenes, people would be sort of like taking out their lighters and waving them back and forth. You've got the plastic spoons, people would, it's just a real sort of event cinema experience. And it's great if you know what you're doing, you can do all the things, but if you don't know what's going on, it can probably seem quite like, what have I walked into? And because, the film, you'll be watching it going, this isn't good, why are people liking this? And why are people behaving like this? But by the end of it, it's impossible not to get sort of swept up in that sort of atmosphere. And, over the years at the Belmont, the room would go from Screen 3, which seats 65 people, up to Screen 2, which seats 146, up to where it would sell out Screen 1, which is 270 people. And let me tell you, that is a lot of plastic spoons that you have to clean up at the end of the night. It took me and two ushers once an hour and a half between all of us to completely clear that room, and we had a giant popcorn box of, not a popcorn box which you'd eat from, but the box that the popcorn would come in. I'm sorry, spoiler alert, not all cinemas make their popcorn live on site in one of those poppers. It's just not true. You couldn't make enough of it fast enough. So yeah, one of those massive boxes completely full of plastic spoons that we then recycle and use for the next event. And yeah, it was just an incredible sort of rise to infamy within Aberdeen, sort of seeing that. I took Lucy, my wife, along to see it once, and she was just like, I don't know what this is. She hadn't really heard anything about it. She just heard me going on about it. And she, has to be said, she had an amazing time at it. She just properly got into it and just was laughing her head off at the end by the sheer ridiculousness of it. And we can talk about this when we get into the film, but it's fair to say that The Room is not the greatest film in the world, and probably was not made as a comedy. The years down the line, it has kind of been, it's fair to say that Tommy has sort of kind of said that was how he always intended it. I would argue otherwise, but I think it's impossible to sort of deny the sheer enjoyment and love that people have for this film, to the point where I think, and I'll sort of let you tell the story, that it has inspired people to do crazy things at certain screenings. And you told me about one particular event at the Prince Charles. So if people have never heard this before, please tell them the story of what somebody did when they were on stage with Tommy.
Well, what I might do actually is that I might put the audio of that into this podcast. So we'll see how good I am, how much in the mood I am for editing this episode together. So I was at a Prince Charles kind of screening, and this person decided to use the Q&A part of the film at the beginning, I believe, to propose to his girlfriend at the time. And she said yes. And I found it ridiculous because, like, you imagine this moment, like, I don't know what it was like for yourself, Dallas. You propose, and you think, like, you probably want to spend the time with that person, you know, loving, you know, celebrating. They just sat down and watched the movie, and I must admit, I threw a couple of plastic spoons off this guy's head. I don't know why, I just thought, and I kind of had to angle it just to get him, because I just thought, like, what are you doing? I just thought it was absolutely ridiculous. You know, fair play to the person for doing it. I think Tommy, when I put the audio in, Tommy blessed the couple as well, which was quite adorable. But yeah, not one of the sights I expect to see. I've seen people propose at the football. Never have I seen someone propose at a film Q&A before the film starts and then having to sit in peace for 90 minutes and be tormented by plastic spoons. That's kind of an original one.
Hey, anything for my princess?
What's your name? Bob. Your name is?
Kelsey.
How long you guys been together, if I may ask?
Just about 2 to 4 years, something like that.
Not bad. Any problems? They give you advice if you have a problem. No problem, you okay? Are you sure? Okay. So, what do you want to do to her, and what do you want to Okay, go for it. Go. You have to lean, right? Go on. Let me go this way. Unless somebody's recording or somebody, whatever. You can record if you like. Okay, so what do you want to say?
I spent my best couple of years with you, and I just want to marry you. I want to make you my future wife. Will you marry me?
Kiss the bride. I give you blessing, but don't worry about my blessing. In the name of Father, good Spirit, for your new way of happiness. And you have to give the ring. See, I'm like okay, perfect. Look at how beautiful. Is it real diamonds? How much cost? Okay, good. Thank you. Good luck to you guys. Thank you very much.
And besides, as Tommy says, you know, if everyone just loved each other, then the world would be a better place. You know, that's good advice. That's good advice. So, when were you first aware of them making a film based on the making of The Room? Had you read The Disaster Artist before this film came out, or...?
Yeah, I can't quite remember the timeline of it, but I do remember being like an absolute idiot, to be honest. So obviously we knew this movie was coming, but like it was like there was just like you would receive casting news all the time, like, oh, Jane Franco's going to be it, Seth Rogen's going to be it, Zac Efron's going to be in it, Josh Hutcherson, all these people just kept getting added and added. But like it seemed to go quiet for a long time about what form this film was going to take. Like there wasn't much footage. And I remembered me and my mates went to a screening one night where it was, I don't think it was a screening, but Greg Sestero was there in Edinburgh at the Cameo, and he was talking about the book. And for some reason we all expected, kind of stupidly, that they were going to show the Disaster Artist film, or at least a preview of it in some form or another, which wasn't the case. It was just sort of like more of an event. And I still to this day can't believe how stupid enough we were to think that was going to happen. But I'd picked up the book sort of ahead of that release, and then I was really taken in by the trailer and marketing. So the film was going to be dropping, I think we're pretty much talking about like 2 years ago today I saw it, where I was heading off to America for 2 and a bit weeks, and the Disaster Artist was going to drop in the UK while I was away in America. I think it was in and around the time. It wasn't going to be available in America when I was there. So the night before I was flying off on a 6 a.m. flight, I went to a 9 p.m. at night early preview screening of The Disaster Artist through like Show Film First or something like that, or Slackers Club, I can't quite remember. And I was really impressed. It was like a tiny small screen. There was security there to make sure that we didn't pirate it, and I was really impressed with it. I think as a tribute to The Room, as the book, and as a film, I thought it was fantastic. I was really taken with it. What about for yourself?
Yeah, no, I'd unfortunately I've never read the book, even though I keep meaning to, and I really need to pick a copy at some point. But I remember sort of hearing the casting news, like you said, and I said, that's like a really sort of star-studded cast for the making of a film, which, of the subject matter, which probably not too many people outside of a small group of loyal fans are actually aware of. And then the teaser trailer dropped, and if you've never seen the teaser trailer, it is essentially about a 3-minute long sequence of Tommy Wiseau flubbing his lines about the one at the top of the show about "I did not hit her, I did not." And for fans of The Room, that was all I needed to see to know that I was going to love this film. If you'd never heard of The Room before, I have no idea what you would have made of that trailer. But for a teaser and a way in, I thought it was just perfect. It's a perfect way to sort of sum up The Room. And when I eventually saw it, I think it was like a show film first did a preview just sort of before, sort of around Christmas time, whatever. And I thought it was just fantastic. I thought it reminded me of Ed Wood in that it sort of showed how this filmmaker went about making his film, but it also did it in a way that was respectful and loving of that person and not mocking or making fun of him. Obviously there's fun to be had at Tommy's expense, but it's never done in like a cruel way, because it's sort of shown from the perspective of Greg sort of meeting this person in like an acting class where he's sort of trying to be doing this bizarre sort of Brando Streetcar Named Desire scene and whatever. And, you have to admit there's something about Tommy, and not in a something about Mary, but there's something about Tommy that intrigues you and draws you and you want to know more, such as where he's from, how old he is and stuff like that, even though to this day I don't think he's ever really given a proper answer to those questions. And I thought it was just a really sort of fantastic film about sort of also looking just from like a trying to make it in Hollywood side of it. You've got the sort of the first half of it is almost like the sort of buddy friendship thing, and then it becomes this let's try and make a movie sort of thing. And if you're a fan of The Room, it is just like so filled with sort of moments and stuff like that you get to see redone, and you're just like, wow, this is amazing. But it does work, I think, as well as, even if you've never seen The Room before, as a sort of let's try and make a movie, sort of buddy comedy movie. I think it does work as well in that respect. Do you think it does?
Yeah, definitely. And I completely agree with what you said, that I think a film like this could... That was initially my concern, sort of when those guys got involved, that, maybe it's going to be a bit of a piss take, or sort of a too much wink and nods to sort of like, aren't these guys a bit wacky and crazy, and for it to be a parody. But I think it comes from a very loving place, and I think it's as interested in sort of how The Room was made as a film, failings and all, and sort of the characters involved to bring a film that is as bizarre and crazy and unique as The Room to life. And I think it kind of covers both so well, and I really like how it could easily be Tommy's story, but I feel it's definitely Mark's, as we sort of go down that rabbit hole. This actor turns up in LA, stars in this film, and sort of the highs and lows that sort of Greg goes through, with this film, that he gets denied the chance to sort of be in something like Malcolm in the Middle, which might sound a bit trivial to some people, but you think of how huge that show was in sort of the early 2000s, and what this kind of did for his career at the time. And I just think it's a great sort of pairing, but I just love how the focus is on Mark as we go down sort of the rabbit hole into the making of The Room.
Yeah, no, I think it was a great idea. I think it's a perfect idea to have him as the conduit into, as I think he said, as Tommy's planet. I think at one point, it's Tommy's planet and we're all living in it, and it's like he's that entry into that world. And like you say, it doesn't sort of shy away from some of the more difficult aspects, because they do have falling outs and stuff like that, and some of it even sort of potentially makes it into the film and stuff like that. And you've got the scene where he's trying to decide, does he he wants to help Tommy make his film, but he's got this audition for Malcolm in the Middle. He could do that, and it's this whole big fight over the beard shaving scene and stuff like that, which is, if you've seen The Room, is a huge revelatory moment when Mark comes back in with the clean shaven and stuff like that. So I think it was an interesting prospect of having the two brothers play these roles. What did you make of the fact that it was the Franco brothers in that? Because Greg was highly sort of supportive of the fact that it was the two of them, wasn't he?
Yeah, I really like that as well. That I've discovered recently that my girlfriend and one of her friends were like, they cannot tell the difference between James and Dave Franco, which absolutely baffles
What?
me. Exactly. Like they were like, yeah, I can't tell the difference. And I was like, right, look at this film here. So I showed them a clip from The Disaster Artist. I was like, clearly two very different people. Taller, smaller, older, younger. And even then, they were struggling to be convinced and stuff about who was who. So, yes, a very good choice. But, there's a more bizarre thing going on out there.
Yeah, no, I mean, so, we're talking about, Dave is great as Greg, but, in terms of like the awards race, James Franco actually got a lot of nominations and awards for his performance as Tommy. I remember at the Golden Globes he won Best Actor in a Musical or Comedy, and the look on Hugh Jackman's face when he didn't win for The Greatest Showman is just a memeable treat. But if anyone had ever met Tommy, I think it would be fair to say that James Franco did deserve the award for that, for the performance he gave. Obviously certain other things led to him, missing out on an Oscar nomination, but we're not going to go into that. But what did you make of James's performance as Tommy?
Yeah, again, I think it's really good. It would have been a really hard one to do, as I say, touched on earlier. Like, this could easily be a parody performance. Like, you've done a really good impression here. So many people have gone as like Tommy, maybe to Halloween shows or anything like that. It could easily have been really bad, ignorant, and cheeky perhaps instead. This is like, I think he almost treats it like if he was playing Winston Churchill or some historical figure or something brought to life. Like, it's, he nails the voice, the facial features, this bit at the end where you see sort of the side-by-side comparisons. Yeah, they nail the visuals, but I think he nails it as sort of an individual, and he keeps that air of mystery. And I think it would have been difficult as well, because you see sort of Tommy at a lot of these events, and it's a bit of a show, he's a character. I think sort of James Franco has managed to bring a bit of humanity to this person that is a bit elusive, and that's sort of the appeal to him as sort of a goer to these events. You're seeing this character brought to life, whereas I think sort of James Franco has done what we would hope for a version like this, is it's seen the character in it and not just played the character that we all know, and that would have been the easy and lazy option to go down.
Yeah, absolutely. He plays the character and not a caricature, I think, which is what helps sell the movie. I think if his performance, like you say, had been any sort of over-the-top sort of parody of what we think of Tommy to be, then I don't think it would have been as successful as it was. Because like we say, it was nominated for Best Adapted Screenplay. The fact that a film based on The Room is an Academy Award nominated film is just amazing. And like you were saying there, the side-by-side footage, if you wanted any proof of how much James Franco and the production team care about the film, you just have to look at how spot on the scenes are that they recreated, even down to the bit with the doggy and stuff like that. And even though the film is almost then a meta commentary on The Room itself, and like the fact that everyone sort of comes to the big premiere at the end to watch the final film, and they're commenting on it, like Jackie Weaver is, Lisa's mom is sort of saying, after the line about, and I definitely have breast cancer, she goes, and it's never mentioned again. And then it's like the bit with the doggy, and it's like, oh, hi Johnny, I didn't realize it was you. And like Seth Rogen's going, how the hell are you not going to recognize that guy? They're just commenting on all the things that people say at these screenings. But it's a film which is basically more than the sum of its parts. If you look at it scene by scene, some of it is terrible, some of it just doesn't make any sense, but there's just something about it's the way that people have taken this film to their hearts. And it's a film, and clearly the filmmakers have managed to do that, and they've created a film which is truly respectful and celebrates the film, but it also works as a film in its own right. And there's some terrific performances in there as well. One of the ones which stood out, for me, sort of rewatching it this past week is and it's one that helped turn me around on an actor, and that's Zac Efron as Chris R. His performance is like a lot better than the person who was Chris R in the film, but he's just like on another level compared to some of the other people in this. I thought he was, you know, like one of the sort of standouts in it. Was there any other sort of the minor sort of performances that sort of stood out for you watching it?
Yeah, I really like Alison Brie as Amber, the girlfriend of Greg Sestero's character. I thought that was a really good performance. Obviously, the film is very much lacking in female characters, but I enjoyed that one. I thought Paul Schreier as the DP on the room get some good moments as well. Yeah, those would probably be my out and out favourite ones. Yeah,
cool. So, do you have any sort of final thoughts on The Room?
I think the Room is certainly like a absolute classic and stuff like that. But yeah, I think the Disaster Artist is, it seems to be a bit overlooked these days. I almost get the feeling of like, you know, it had this big push, but it's like when you think of like people when they go, oh, what's people's favourite A24 films, you know, we get a lot of the same ones. You know, there's always sometimes the odd one that sticks out, but not a lot of many people seem to pick out this sort of Disaster Artist, even though it's well acclaimed, you know, well reviewed, well watched. I think it was one of these ones that people really went out of their way to kind of see. It seems to have kind of dropped under the radar a little bit.
Yeah, I know. I was watching it and thinking, you know, probably sort of similar to you with, you know, when people sort of say, what's the best A24 film or your favourite A24 film, you know, I would sort of put, you know, the likes of Under the Skin, Moonlight and all that at the top. But if you're looking for what is potentially the funniest and maybe almost most enjoyable A24 film, one that you could just sit down and watch anytime, because something like Under the Skin or whatever, you probably need to be in a certain mood to rewatch. But I think Disaster Artist is one that you could just chuck on at any time and you're going to sort of, you know, end the viewing with a huge smile on your face and stuff like that. And then you're going to want to, and more importantly, it's then going to make you want to go and find the nearest viewing of The Room and then to throw some plastic spoons around. So, you know, the fact that it is able to work as a film on its own and celebrates the film that it's meant to be as well, I think is the hugest compliment that you can give. And, you know, I know that we're both members of a A24 Facebook group, and I know that one of your pet peeves at the moment is people sort of saying, I know this isn't an A24 film, but I just want to throw out another film. I'm not sure if you've seen this one yet, but it's actually out on Netflix, and I was watching it and thinking, this is basically just The Disaster Artist again, but told from a different angle. And this was Dolomite Is My Name. Have you heard of this one?
I've been desperate to see this. It's been getting a lot of buzz on another podcast that I like, the Pod Charles Cinema one.
Yeah, but the Dolomite Is My Name is essentially Eddie Murphy in a huge return to form, sort of probably back to sort of like Dreamgirls of how good he is in this film. And it's just a film which just makes pure use of his talent. And it's about a guy called Rudy Ray Moore, who is a comedian who became a sort of a huge sensation when he started he created this character called Dolomite, and he put out some albums, they got picked up, and then he tried to make the transfer into film, and he basically was told no, so he went about making it himself and getting it self-distributed and into cinemas and stuff like that. And this is basically the sort of almost blaxploitation version of The Disaster Artist. And I think if you're a firm under The Disaster Artist, a fan of seeing the behind the scenes makings of Hollywood and how you go about that, I highly recommend Dolomite Is My Name as an extra bonus recommendation there for you. And Lee, I'd love to hear what you think when you finally get round to seeing this one on Netflix as well.
Definitely.
Cool. And so next up is The Ballad of Lefty Brown, and this is written and directed by Jared Moshe and stars Bill Pullman, Peter Fonda, Tommy Flanagan and Jim Caviezel. And, you know, we're about to talk about the film, which is basically a film about a cowboy called Lefty Brown who witnesses the murder of his longtime partner, the newly elected Senator Edward Johnson, and he strikes out to find the killers and avenge his friend's cold-blooded murder. Now, before we find out our thoughts on it, Lee, once again, you've delivered the goods, and you've interviewed Jared before. He was on a previous episode, but you've got a wee snippet to tease us with, haven't you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Jared joined us a few months ago in sort of August to talk about the making of this film. So I think we could call this one of A24 sort of overlooked films. So yeah, it was really good to speak with Jared about the making of this film. You know, we've kind of come off sort of the Disaster Artist, Lady Bird, which got all the attention at sort of the tail end of 2017. So it was really good to be able to speak with Jared about this film and kind of shine a bit of a light on it. You were saying westerns are so hard to make and to get audiences for. When did you sort of realize that you could actually not just make one western, but then follow that up with a second western in the form of the Ballad of Lefty Brown? When did you sort of realize that there is an audience perhaps for this?
You know, when I realized after we made Dead Man's Burden that, like, oh wow, if you make a western, you're guaranteed to get into Walmart. Like, there's interest in Redbox. There's a western channel. You know, I think it was. I remember when we were location scouting Dead Man's Burden, just driving around and seeing, like, and we'd go and we'd sit down with people in their house, or we'd sit down and we'd go to a bar or something. Everywhere you went, there would be westerns playing. They'd be either watching the Stars Western Channel, or you'd go to a gas station and they'd have like two sections of, like, this was back when people were still really buying lots of movies. Well, but there was like DVDs of like modern movies and DVDs of westerns. So I realized there's this huge audience for it. And I didn't necessarily, when I sat down to make Lefty, knew I was going to do another western. I'd been thinking about a couple things, but the character of Lefty had been one that had stayed with me for a long time, because he was really born out of, you know, watching tons and tons and tons of westerns. And so when it was time to, like, make my next feature, I knew I had to tell his story.
I was curious when I first watched it. I always wonder what kind of came first. Was it sort of the character of Lefty Brown, or was it the story that this character might find himself in? What came first for you?
Well, for me, it came from watching all these old John Wayne westerns, where you have, you know, the Duke, this character who's like, you know, John Wayne, and then he always has the sidekick, and he's either played by Andy Devine or Walter Brennan or, you know, Gabby Hayes, and this guy who everyone laughs at, everyone makes fun of. Everyone, you know, he's, you know, the butt of every joke. Yet he's also the person who John Wayne relies on at the most important moments. You know, he's the one in Rio Bravo. It's Walter Brennan in the jailhouse with the shotgun. The last line of defense, everything goes to shit. And to me, that was really interesting, the dichotomy of that character, like that dichotomy of that character. Who is this person that everyone makes fun of, yet the hero relies on? And so I wanted to tell that character's story, and I realized the only way I was going to tell that character's story was by getting rid of the hero.
I think that's one of my favorite parts of the movie. Is like you go in, you're thinking like Ballad of Lefty Brown. Oh, of course, he's going to be the hero character. It'll be that, and I love how the movie pulls you kind of straight the rug out from you straight away. I think that was such a clever choice.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, that was what we wanted to do. We wanted to make it feel make the audience have the sense of the rug being pulled out of them the same way Lefty felt that way.
How did you sort of cast the role of Lefty Brown and find Bill Pullman for the role?
So, Bill is someone I've always really admired as an actor. And he's so when we were going out to try to figure out who could play Lefty, Bill was a dream to get. And I was like, I have no idea how I'm going to get Bill Pullman. But we managed to get his agent, is Hildy Gottlieb, who's married to Walter Hill, so she's a big Western fan. So we were able to get her the script, and she really loved it for Bill. We got it to Bill, and I remember sitting down with him. You know, so he liked it. And I think he was shooting Independence Day 2 at the time, so there's like this glide period. And I remember sitting down for this first meeting, and it was set up through agents, so it was like a very awkward first meeting at like a cafe that neither of us had been to before, where you actually have to like wait and sort of, you know, it's tray service, so you wait and get your food in order, and you're trying to like have this conversation, like feel each other out and meet each other while you're like trying to figure out how to order, you know, what you want to order, and a line of people are behind you. But, you know, it became very clear as we were talking that we both had this great understanding of both the genre and who this character was. And the thing about Lefty as a character is it needs an actor who can take you all the way from someone who's, you know, second fiddle, who's a beta, and try to make him into an alpha. And I think Bill has shown that over the course of his career. You know, this is a guy who followed up Independence Day with Lost Highway.
Yeah, he's definitely one of Hollywood's most underrated actors, and I thought this was definitely one of his best performances. I thought you two made clearly a great pair in your script and his performance. It was a real collaboration there, it felt.
Yeah, it was. He was on board for about a little less than a year before we actually went into production. So that gave us the opportunity to really talk through, read through the script and talk through it and find a version that felt true to both of us. It wasn't about like rehearsing. It was like, all right, let's talk through the scenes. Let's talk through the dialogue. What are we thinking here? What are we not thinking here? And I trusted him to find his version of the character, which I think is really important. Trusting your actors to be able to do that.
I love the visual style of this film. You'd mentioned sort of your previous film, and this one that you chose to shoot it on 35 millimeter. What was sort of the creative thinking behind that, and what are sort of the pros and cons of going into the desert and shooting on film? You hear some of the horror stories over the years of how it's affected people, but what was it like for yourself?
I mean, for me, I knew I needed to shoot on film. We shot on 2x 35, which gives you a natural widescreen look and the right amount of grain without getting the heroism of which I think anamorphic gives you. To me, it wasn't really a choice. I felt like for this genre, you had to shoot on film because I don't think westerns tend to look. Well, most westerns, when you watch them and they're shot digitally, there's a quality that's missing. You want to have it. The genre is so part of our brain that you want to have that, that grain and that depth that film gives you. And yeah, it was risky. I mean, our dailies were on Dead Man's Burden. Our dailies were like a week behind. On Lefty, they were 3 behind. Because you ship it from Montana, and then you ship it from Montana, and then and then it flies to LA, and then it gets over, and so that's one day, and then that night Photochem does the processing, and the next day our editor could pick up the drive with the processed film, and he could upload it and cut some stuff, and so it was like 3 days later, and then it depended how good the internet was where we were.
You also mentioned sort of shooting in Montana. What was that sort of like? Was it as challenge or rewarding to be shooting in such challenging terrain?
Oh, it was totally worth it. It was totally worth it. It was Montana was a beautiful canvas to shoot a film on. We'd scouted a bunch of places, and we've been looking. We looked at Colorado, we looked at New Mexico, and then I went and scouted Montana. And Montana really is still the frontier untouched by civilization. And what it allows you is to get the camera and point it in 4 different directions and have amazing vistas and shots that give you that sort of scope of a landscape that you can juxtapose with what is essentially an intimate story, that is an intimate coming of age story.
When you're sort of in a place like Montana and shooting this frontier, is it moments like that when you think back to being that film fan, watching westerns in film club, and being a lover of the genre, where it's like, wow, like you're almost living sort of your younger self's dream in a way?
Oh, totally. There is this amazing. You're like out here in the middle of nowhere on the frontier, making a western the way people made westerns, 100 years ago, yeah. And it was, and it's really living a western when you're making a western, because you start realizing like, oh, you are totally at the mercy of the weather, of the horses, of whatever animals are there. It is like, oh, I'm in this and I'm living this, and I'm taking a 4-wheeler up a hill, and it might just suddenly start snowing, and we'll just deal with it.
The film premiered at South by Southwest, and it was shortly bought up by sort of A24. What's it like when you hear someone like A24 with such a positive reputation and an excellent filmography is keen to add your film to their catalogue?
It was really exciting. They had released a western I was a big fan of called Slow West.
Yeah, I love that one too.
Which is fantastic. Such a European twist of the genre, so good. And so I was really excited when they came on board, because sometimes I think the thing about a western is they're not enough made that necessarily every distributor knows what to do with it. And I love those guys at A24. I've known them since I was a sales agent, multiple lifetimes ago for all of us, and it was so cool to just have that they wanted us to be part of their brand.
So that was Jared. Thanks for coming on the show. And of course, you can check out the full interview episode on our back catalogue there. So, Lee, when did you first become aware of the Ballad of Lefty Brown, and what were your initial thoughts on seeing it?
When I made the list for this podcast, it's one of these sorts of movies where it was like, I find it quite interesting because, like, there's so many films that you think this was the period where I consider this the A24, like, this was when it was really exploding. You've got your kind of Lady Birds, everything like that kind of coming along. So yeah, like, with this kind of film, like, what you think of, like, sort of, we had a hell of a peak, sort of, we had a kind of good time, and then we sort of, like, in the sort of the summer of 2017, we had sort of It Comes at Night, which I know you were a huge fan of, Ghost Story, Menasha, kind of a lesser known one, Good Time, and then Woodstock, and then we sort of had this big explosion of A24 films, which everyone knows catches people's attention, with The Florida Project, The Killing of the Sacred Deer, Lady Bird, The Disaster Artist. And then it sort of goes into this sort of spell for kind of pretty much until sort of May next year, really, where it kicks off with sort of The Ballad of Lefty Brown, The Vanished of Sydney Hall, Last Movie Star, Lean on Pete, Backstabber for Beginners, and then we kind of come back into sort of First Reformed, where it's like a well-known A24 film. So I think this sort of has an interesting period where, it's lesser known films sort of within A24, and I think it's going to be interesting for folk like us to, all well and good doing 3-hour episodes where we really dive into Lady Bird and Sacred Deer, etc., but it'll be interesting to shine a light on things like sort of the Ballad of Lefty Brown or The Last Movie Star, which I've heard really poor things about, to be honest. But this is sort of the last sort of spell of A24 films where there's quite a few I've yet to see, and that was the case with The Ballad of Lefty Brown until I got the chance to dive into it with Jared. What about for yourself?
I'm actually kind of similar. I was aware of the film. I believe it screened at the Glasgow Film Festival a couple of years ago, and I think Bill Pullman was across for that. So I was aware of it, but I unfortunately I think that was that the year of The Beast of the East, and I sadly wasn't able to make it down for that one. But like you, I'm sort of looking at the calendar of A24 films here, and yet following The Disaster Artist, despite me sort of saying that I kind of really got on board around the sort of First Reformed Hereditary time, and I'd seen all these ones, I am now going on a period of a film run of 5 or 6 films here that I've never actually seen before. So there's quite a big gap in there, that sort of late 2017, early 2018 gap where I've not seen. So I'm sort of coming brand new to all these. So it's actually quite exciting for me to sort of see and visit films for the first time that I've not been aware of. And yeah, this one was actually really sort of interesting. We've kind of delved in briefly into the sort of Western genre before with sort of Slow West, which was a really interesting take in that it was done by a Scotsman looking at sort of Scots and Irish coming over to America, whereas this feels like a much more traditional sort of Western. This is one of America's greatest genres, although one could argue that the Italians have done it best with the spaghetti westerns. But, this is what, they built their industry on sort of in the sort of 40s and stuff. You got the CinemaScope, the vast landscapes, the frontier, that sort of thing. And this feels like a very sort of traditional hark back to that sort of style of filmmaking. And yeah, it was really sort of an interesting sort of melancholic look at sort of almost like that old West is coming to an end with the way the sort of story plays out. And it's a very interesting sort of turn and central character actually, in the terms of Lefty Brown, and that he's not really the hero, he's the lead, he's the sidekick who becomes thrust into the spotlight sort of 20-30 minutes into the film. So I find it quite interesting that it went down that route. What did you think of Bill's performance in this? Of course, it was Bill Pullman, not Bill Paxton, which during the 80s and early 90s was something that people always seem to get confused of. The surnames always threw people.
This is what was kind of my favourite thing about it, was that sort of the cast, to be honest. I think with this, I was really excited to see Bill Pullman as the leading man in something again. And I think he's an underrated actor that I think we've done a bit of a disservice to sort of as a film industry. I think, he had such a strong performance in something like Independence Day, and people always go back to that, they quote it and so on. And I think sort of his career has sort of not really been as strong as it has been kind of since, to be honest. I think the best thing he's maybe done in sort of the past sort of few years was something like Battle of the Sexes, that sort of kind of made it out there into the public sphere. I thought he was great as Jack Kramer, this really sexist kind of pig. But then with sort of the Ballad of Lefty Brown, it was just like, this guy has such great leading man potential. He's like this old school American star, really. You know, you could have seen him in the 60s being sort of the star in these kind of Western films that kind of America's left behind. And I just thought it was excellent casting to build a film around this, and I really like that unique approach of Lefty Brown was the sidekick that becomes the lead we're so used to in these kind of films, as you say, of like Lefty Brown would have been the, you know, the big balls kind of cowboy and stuff like that, would have dominated the screen. And I just really like how he steps up to this. I think it was really special casting and a really nice, clever trick.
Yeah, no, I think, because I was actually going to ask you, you know, if, you know, you think of Bill Pullman, name what's the film you think of when you think of Bill Pullman. I think, like you say, 9 out of 10, or probably almost 10 out of 10 people are going to say Independence Day, because, you know, it's such an iconic moment for anyone sort of growing up in the 90s and whatever. But, you know, like you say, he has done some amazing films. You know, one which I always sort of go back to in how good he is in is actually The Last Seduction, in which he plays the bad guy. He plays the sort of vicious drug-dealing husband of Linda Fiorentino, who she's trying to escape from, and he can do both. You know, he can do villainous and he can do heroic, like in Independence Day, or he can sort of, and you know, actually thinking about it now, I'm actually thinking of, you know, sort of seeing him as sort of someone who was the leading man, who's sort of almost sort of fallen into the sort of sidekick role in this film. It's almost conjuring up images, especially with the sort of handlebar moustache sort of thing, of Leonardo DiCaprio's Rick Dalton in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, someone who was the sort of leading man in these TV shows, who then is sort of pigeonholed into these sort of minor roles of the villain or the sidekick in these Western things and stuff like that. But, you know, this is the chance for him to shine again, and it's just great to see him sort of get the chance to do that. And it's a really interesting performance in the way he plays it, in that, you know, there's maybe something slightly off in his head, and it could be due to trauma, perhaps, maybe sort of a bit of PTSD, because there's sort of hints that they've been involved in sort of fights and maybe sort of some sort of uprising in the past and stuff like that with all these other characters, you know. And, you know, he's clearly a very loyal person. You know, he's been with the senator played by Peter Fonda, which sort of conjures up links. You know, his brother sort of Henry Fonda was in like huge sort of part in sort of Once Upon a Time in the West, you know, my personal favourite Western. So it was great to sort of see that. But, you know, he then gets to spar against the likes of a sort of, you know, up and coming sort of Tommy Flanagan, but then also sort of Jim Caviezel, and it answers the question of what's Jim Caviezel been up to all these years ever since The Passion of the Christ, you know. So it was great to see him on screen as well, and it was just a really sort of classic take. I don't think there wasn't much to, you know, rocking the boat or trying to do something new with the genre or putting a twist in it, like, you know, some people have done, say, like S. Craig Zala did with sort of Bone Tomahawk, which sort of took the Western into the sort of horror genre. You've got even sort of Paul Thomas Anderson, he had that sort of Western vibe with There Will Be Blood as well, but this is just a pure sort of classic hark back to that great American Western. And overall, I thought he did a great job of sort of bringing that spirit to the big screen.
Yeah, definitely. I think this is one where I think we're about to enter a bit of an unknown period of A24 films, and I think this one's off to a good start. And I think this is the point of the whole podcast, is it's not just the big ones that we need to kind of fly the flag for. It's like raising the attention when there's movies like this where you maybe have to go out of your way to find it. Maybe it's not on the Showtime app. Maybe you need to rent it from somewhere or find it. And I think that this is one of those ones I think people should get on board with.
Yeah, no, it's definitely one that people should check out. You know, if they're doing like us, they're following us through the catalogue and wanting to check out everything. But just you know, if you're a fan of a Western, I think it's definitely one, and it sort of feels like it's with. I'm not going to go into spoilers, but you know, with the stuff that happens at the end, it does sort of feel like it's sort of making a point about the Western age, sort of maybe sort of coming to an end, and sort of something new will coming on from that. And what do you think of Jared as a writer-director, you know, are you excited for what's going to come next for him?
Yeah, I think if you go back to our interview, I think he teased that he was going to be working on some real exciting things. I think the big takeaway that he was going to be doing something with Bad Robot, which, you know, Star Wars, Star Trek, Mission Impossible, you know, some really weird and wonderful kind of little films as well. I'm really excited to see what Jared does again and stuff like that. I think he made sort of a really strong impression here, and he's someone that clearly loves the genre as well. So yeah, I'm excited to see what comes next. And when he kind of told me about Bad Robot being this kind of something that he was working on for them, I'm like, what's it going to be? You know, they're already kind of quite mysterious as it is, so it's quite exciting to have had someone that's going off to do a Bad Robot film come on our podcast, and I'm certainly grateful for that.
Absolutely, and I'm just looking on IMDb, and it seems he does have an upcoming project being teased at the moment. It's called Aporia, and apparently it's described as a grounded, this is what it actually says under the plot kept under wraps, described as a grounded sci-fi drama with time travel elements. So it's going to be interesting to see, you know, he did a great job of recreating the Western sort of vibe there. So it's going to be interesting to see if he sort of does traditional sci-fi or if he's going to put a new twist on it. But I think if it's working with Bad Robot, then I'm sure there'll be a few twists on the tail, and it's going to be exciting to see how he grows as a filmmaker, and we'll see if he comes back to the fold in A24 in the future, because, you know, A24 have done a great job of retaining talent and working, you say, you know, we've mentioned Waves at the top of the show. That's Trey Edward Schultz, done 3 films now with them. So, you know, when they find a filmmaker that they like, they always seem to want to be able to give them opportunity to work in the future. So hopefully we'll see him come back into the A24 fold in the future as well. But, you know, talking about people coming back into the fold, you know, we've got another great interview lined up in the future, you know, from the Bling Ring. We've got Katie Chang, and Lee, do you want to tease up what we might be able to hear next week?
Yeah, so Katie Chang joins us as the leader of the Bling Ring, so that was really exciting. It was kind of good to go into what it was like to be in sort of the, you know, a lot of our interviews have sort of been from that mid to kind of late period of A24 kind of filmography, whereas this kind of really goes to the beginning, like what was it like to be involved in one of their projects at such an early stage. And I think, you know, what's it like working with like Sofia Coppola, and the Bling Ring, I think it's one of these films, I think, you know, it's certainly almost seemed to split opinion at the time, but there seems to be a bit of a consensus now that it was a bit of an overlooked film, or perhaps a bit underrated. So it was really good to chat with one of the kind of leading stars about this film that seems to be kind of packing quite a punch a few years on for viewers. When did the Bling Ring first come to your attention?
It was mid 2011. Which is a really long time ago, and it's stressing me out. I was 16, and I had just come back from, like, I was doing this nerd camp at Brown University. I did like this film editing camp for like 3 weeks, and it was the first time I had been away from my parents. I had a lot of fun, but I came home, and my manager, Carol Debo, she's still my manager. She said, I found this thing on Breakdown. They're looking for like a 17-year-old Korean American with no accent. That's kind of you. You know, I reached out. They want you to make a video of yourself just talking about yourself. So initially it was just talk about myself. Don't act or anything. Just be me and talk about me. And we didn't know Sofia Coppola was attached to the film at the time. It was just Fred Roos's name on the Breakdown. And Fred Roos is our producer, and obviously he worked with Francis Ford Coppola for a long time. And so, yeah, it was just, it seemed odd, you know, because usually when you get submitted for a project and they ask you to audition, it's you get scenes and you do the scenes. This time it was just talk about school, talk about your interests. So I think I talked about, like, yeah, I'd just gotten back from camp and I wanted to be a paleontologist and was interested in dinosaurs, and I liked, you know, like Korean food. Like, I just talked about stuff that was on my mind at that moment.
Yeah, no, I think when rewatching it for this, I think it's almost become more relevant nowadays with the sort of upsurge in social media and stuff like that than it almost was back when it came out in 2013. So excited to listen to that next week. But the following week, in 2 weeks' time, we're going to be back to review The Vanishing of Sydney Hall and The Last Movie Star. And as teased, they may be both first-time watches for both of us. But in the meantime, Lee, if people want to chat to you about A24 films or just films in general, where can they find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at @LeeHutchison_.
And you can catch me on @ChampCelluloid on Twitter and on Instagram as well. But till next time, it's over. Everyone's betrayed me. I'm fed up of this world. You're tearing me apart, Lisa! We'll catch you next time. Bye.